Yes, we are back, ladies and gentlemen, with another episode of Mixed Combat Radio. I know it's been a while. I know it's been a minute. And TBV's on vacation, so you know when TBV's on vacation, we come out. I'm joined today by a special guest. Obviously, we have the ordinary panel. I don't mean ordinary in a negative term. Santiago and Alex will be joining us soon, so they are on, of course. But I'm joined by a special guest, Mr. Anthony Walker of Sherdog Radio Network. A very special honor, in my opinion, because I'm a longtime listener to the Sherdog Radio Network. Definitely go hit them up on iTunes, any sort of podcast outlet, Mixler, if you want to watch them live. Definitely one of the best MMA podcasts and just overall radio networks you can listen to. So, Anthony, how are you, man?
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for the kind words. Definitely happy to join you. I'm a big fan of the Boxing Voice, so it's good to work together, and we get to talk about some MMA without Ness trying to hate on you. So, we're going to enjoy that.
Oh, man, poor Ness over in Puerto Rico, living the life, you know. God bless that man. But, yes, we're here with a ton of topics. Obviously, we've been gone for a bit. So we have Jon Jones PED scandal. We have Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather, the aftermath of that, and especially looking at it from more of an MMA perspective. And Anthony here would definitely help us out with that. And obviously, UFC 215, which is around the corner. Demetrius Johnson versus Ray Borg. Amanda Nunes versus Valentina Shevchenko. That's a pretty decent card overall, in my opinion. And obviously, we had UFC Rotterdam yesterday. And even though that card was made fun of by the media, it was entertaining, to say the least. But before we get into that, Santiago, how are you, man?
I'm good, man. Nice to be on here. Talk about some of these topics as your resident casual MMA fan. And, you know, what else is to say but to get to the topics?
Yeah, man, I can't wait to get in. First off, Anthony, man, since it's sort of your first time being introduced to this audience, the TBV audience from this angle, obviously you've called into the Boxing Voice a couple times, especially recently. But, I mean, what's your overall perspective? And we're going to get into the main topic, really, is Floyd Mayweather, Conor McGregor, and the aftermath of that, really. Because I think we've talked about ad nauseum what happened in the ring, what the buildup was, all the the significance of the event. But really, what's next? What's next for Conor McGregor, especially because Floyd's most likely retired? Anthony, in your perspective, I mean, first off, your overall thoughts on the event and then the ramifications of it and what's next for McGregor.
Overall, I thought the event was a ridiculous success. I mean, that was the best case scenario for all parties involved, for Conor to go out there and last as long as he did, for the boxer to ultimately win by finish, and for Conor to not embarrass himself as well. I think that was the best possible thing that could happen. And the funny thing is, some other guys in MMA media have pointed this out, and I think this is a really astute observation, that everybody had their narrative confirmed. So whether you were the diehard boxing fan that knew that boxing was going to prevail because this was a boxing match under boxing rules, your narrative was thumbs up. If you thought that Conor is going to show that he's a true fighter and he wasn't going to go out like a punk, hey, there it is. The only way that you didn't come out on the right side of this is if you swore that Conor was going to knock him out. And that, I think, for most people who have half a brain of logic up there, know that just wasn't plausible. That just wasn't realistic. It was just hope against hope for that to happen.
I think Luke Thomas brought that up on MMA Beat. And I thought it was a really good point. Like you said, it was very astute that everyone comes out of it saying they're right, which is weird. That doesn't happen often in combat sports, where almost every party comes out of an event, of a fight, saying, yeah, my prediction was right, even though they're diametrically opposed opinions.
It's pretty interesting how that happened. Like, nobody really looks bad. I mean, the sport of mixed martial arts has an increased spotlight on it. Boxing obviously has a bigger spotlight on it. You know, everybody made a lot of money. So far, they're saying that at least Dana White was saying that they think they did about 6.5 million buys. Showtime is estimating it's lower, somewhere in the 5 million range. That sounds like a hell of a success to me. Like, I don't see how I could be involved with that and not have a smile on my face at the end of the day, even if I did get knocked out in the 10th round.
It's funny that you said smile on your face. And I think a lot of people in the MMA community, MMA media, MMA fans are still overall very happy about this event happening. And unfortunately, the boxing community, the boxing fandom, the boxing media is still sticking their nose up at it. Like, it's very hard for people to just say it was a fun time and just to have it be that. It was a good time. It exceeded a lot of our expectations in a lot of ways. and then we can just move on and talk about what's next. But we still have that boxing fandom, that boxing culture saying, no, this was our sport dominating yours. This was our sport showing that we're better than yours. Go back to your thing. Like, that's where I still feel like the boxing side of it is at. The people like me, like you, who love both sports, who are entertained by both sports and are invested in both sports, we're rare. We're not a huge percentage of the fandom, I would say. So I think you really have these two polarized groups. And even though this event was polarizing, we had no resolution for that polarization. We still have an even more polarized community within combat sports, I would say. It's just interesting. I think, in 10 years' time, for somebody like a Josh Gross type of person to come and write a book about this event would be very fascinating, to see what the perspective of it is 10 years later, to see how it changed the culture, changed the sports. Because I do mean sports. It will change boxing. This event will change boxing in some ways. It will change MMA in more ways, most likely. But it was just an earth-shattering and changing event. But what's next for Conor? I mean, Conor really is, I think, the guy that gained the most from everything involved here. Obviously, Mayweather made more money.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
But Conor arguably now is the biggest star in all of combat sports. I would make the argument that he is. He's a bigger star than Canelo and Anthony Joshua, without a doubt.
Definitely.
Sorry, go on.
In sports, period.
In sports, period. Wow. I don't know if I would go that far. I think it's very hard when you have a guy like Ronaldo or a Messi.
I'm forgetting soccer. Soccer almost doesn't exist to my mind, but yeah, outside of soccer, yeah, he's probably the biggest star in sports, period. And on top of that, it's like you've probably heard me say this repeatedly, but Conor McGregor is an agent of change, and everything that he does seems to change the game little by little. And by the time his career is over, we might be looking at a totally different structure of combat sports as we know it.
I think it was either Breen or somebody else brought this up, like the Kurt Flood analogy, and how, like you said, how changing he is to the industry, to the culture, to the sport, to the business of it all. In 5 years' time, when McGregor retires, because McGregor's not going to last that long in this game. He's making too much money. And he's seen the side effects of the sport too much, in my opinion, to be around till he's Randy Couture age. We're going to see massive changes. Like, the UFC as we know it has already changed. Like, for guys that grew up in the Zuffa era like me, because I'm a little bit younger, I was in the SCG era. I wasn't really a fan back then, but the Zuffa era, I've always been a fan. And now it's diametrically different. Even though Dana White's still there, the business structure and the business motives are different. In the Zuffa era, I don't know if we get this fight. I don't know if we get Mayweather McGregor.
No, definitely not. I mean, we've seen the UFC stop previous attempts to do this. Roy Jones Jr. and Anderson Silva, they made a hell of a campaign trying to fight each other. They both really wanted that fight. Roy Jones was coming to Anderson Silva's fight, sitting cage side. Even backstage after he lost to Weidman, Roy Jones Jr. was like the first person to comfort him. They were campaigning for that fight. The UFC stopped it. I remember Kermit Cintron was talking about trying to fight in the UFC at one point. That got shut down. There was always, the only person that ever successfully made it through was James Toney, and that's probably because of the type of promotion he did to achieve that bout. But everybody else got shut down.
They knew they had to win with James Toney at that point.
Especially since he didn't want to train.
Luke Rockhold fight Roy Jones now. Roy Jones now is so faded and so, just gone at this point in terms of being able to take a punch. You throw him in there with a prime fighter at any point, yeah, it's bad. It's a bad news sort of event, and vice versa for the sport. But Santiago, very quickly, since you're more of a casual MMA fan, you're definitely a hardcore boxing fan, I would say. What's your overall perspective on the ramifications of this event? What it will do to both sports and its cultures and its fandoms. I mean, I know this is a very broad and general topic, but these are questions that we have to start asking ourselves. Like, what are the effects of this mega event? This size of an event the sport has never seen before, or the likes of which we haven't seen since the heyday, since Sugar Ray Leonard's, since Roberto Duran, since you could pull 30 million people on CBS watching it. Far gone are those days. So this is the closest to it. What are your opinion on it, Santiago?
Well, obviously, most people had the same thought when the fight was first announced. It's just a circus. But as the fight, drew closer and we started seeing all the hype and promotion, we thought maybe this could be a good thing. And I was always of the mindset that regardless of the fact, McGregor still was a professional fighter, as I mentioned before on an episode of TVV, and that he was going to give a good account of himself. I did not think it was going to be the whitewash people were expecting it to be, and it wasn't. I honestly thought that at the end of the night, it was a win for both sports. McGregor acquitted himself very well. First fight in professional boxing, having had the amateur background previously, and he's made the most money he's ever made in his career. And there were a lot of eyeballs, both legally and illegally, on this event. There is no way this was a loss for anybody, in my opinion. So I feel like there will be completely different outlooks on both sports. Like for MMA fans who thought maybe boxing was too limited, and our guy who is specialized in different things, they got to see a much more deeper expression of boxing. And for casual boxing fans who thought all MMA is shit, it's just street fighting, they got to see a guy who basically showed all of his striking prowess with his background in karate and all that good stuff. So for me, it can be nothing but positives.
Anthony, we have Tony Ferguson versus Kevin Lee coming up for the interim title. And I've never felt like a fight mattered so little, unfortunately. I just don't see Conor McGregor fighting the winner of that, even though that's obviously the most deserving person to fight for that title and to fight Conor McGregor. I mean, in your opinion, do you think Conor takes the winner of that fight? If he doesn't, is it Nate Diaz or Paulie? I mean, are those really the options we have? Is Nate Diaz or Paulie Malignaggi?
I think Nate Diaz is probably the most logical option. I mean, I'm really not holding my breath for the Paulie fight. If it comes on, of course, I'll watch it. But I mean, I'm so tired of seeing Paulie do interviews talking about how he got pushed and it didn't get knocked down and he doesn't have power, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. We saw what happened in that little bit of clip of sparring. That doesn't tell the whole picture of the sparring match. We know Conor already fought Floyd. We saw what he did there. Like, let the boxing thing die. I'm very happy to see the boxing thing just totally die from Conor. We saw it. It was great. No thank you to another one. But as far as Tony Ferguson and Kevin Lee, I think the big X factor in that is Kevin Lee. If Kevin Lee goes out there and has a great fight against Tony Ferguson, pulls off a win, finish or not, if he gets on the mic and he says something spectacular, which Kevin Lee is very capable of doing, I think that's something that can pique Conor McGregor's interest. Kevin Lee, in my opinion, is the next big star in the UFC. And if he wins this Tony Ferguson fight, the sky's the limit for him.
I remember listening to the Jordan Breen show the other day and hearing you talk about Kevin Lee being the next potential star in the UFC. I don't really disagree with any of your points. I may disagree with the UFC actually doing it, like the UFC actually pushing the buttons to help make him a star. I may not see that, but I definitely see the star potential in Kevin Lee. But I can see him doing like the Nate Diaz, Michael Johnson type post-fight interview, where that really got him that injury replacement was that post-fight interview, because they could just play that on a loop over and over and over again. Kevin Lee has the wit, has the humor to definitely say a couple lines that you could play on a promo over and over and over again and sell a fight. I just don't know if Conor takes it. Again, I just don't think it equals as much money as the Nate Diaz fight, unfortunately. I'm a Nate Diaz fan. Born and raised. I'm a Diaz brother fan through and through. But I don't even want that fight right now. I want Nate Diaz to fight a Khabib. I want him to fight somebody else. I want Nate Diaz to do something else. But we won't get that because it's prize fighting. Now with the Paulie fight, who's really asking for it? Is it MMA fans or is it boxing fans?
Both Paulie.
It's just Paulie. Just
Paulie. Paulie. That's it. I don't hear anybody else really asking for this fight. Other than, of course, that's on the list of fights that could make a lot of money. So yeah, somebody back there cashing a check might be asking for this. But outside of that, like, are you really willing to pay a top dollar to watch Paulie take on Conor. Like, we'll watch it. This is work for us. We'll watch it. We're obligated to watch it.
Let's be honest, fans will too. They watch Mayweather McGregor when that was a pointless fight that didn't need to happen.
It was a pointless fight, but it was also the meeting of two superstars who have, done a lot for their respective sports and will garner interest no matter who they were fighting. So this was a rare meeting of two superstars that happen to be crossing paths at the same time. Paulie is not that. Paulie is kind of dragging on his name through this clip of sparring footage. And I'm if I see that damn clip one more time, I'm gonna be so upset. I can't stand to watch that clip again. But if this is what's going to push us into a fight, and maybe for Conor that will make the most money because it will take place under boxing rules, under boxing promotion. McGregor Sports and Entertainment would be the headline promotion on that. So maybe from a money perspective, that's the best thing for him. But just speaking as people who like fights and like to analyze them and talk about them and watch them, I don't want to see that. I want to see Kevin Lee or Tony Ferguson win and fight Conor, but we're most likely going to get Nate.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're going to get Nate probably first quarter of next year, not this year. Conor's going to take a good vacation time and spend some time with his family. Santiago, what is your perception on this whole Paulie Malignaggi fight? I know they keep saying March, St. Patty's Day in New York. I mean, I know you are a casual MMA fan. I mean, does the name of Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee, Nate Diaz, do those fights interest you enough, or do you think they interest maybe the boxing public enough to cross over? Does the boxing fandom like you, who watch MMA very casually, maybe know some names, 2 or 3, do they start watching McGregor, Kevin Lee? Do they start watching McGregor, Tony Ferguson? I think most people watch McGregor, Nate Diaz, but do they watch McGregor, Tony Ferguson? Do they watch McGregor, Kevin Lee, in your opinion? Does he get that crossover from boxing fans?
Well, obviously, I would imagine that, for people that feel like, oh, look at this McGregor guy, he did pretty good. I wonder how good he is in MMA. Guys who've never seen him fight at all, in mixed martial arts, even when he wasn't in the UFC, they would be curious, and I'd imagine they'd be doing some research. It's like, okay, what weight class does he fight in? He's a 2-division champion, 145, 155. He beat Eddie Alvarez for the title. Like, who are the top guys at 155? And I'd imagine that they'd, educate themselves a little just to see, like, okay, are these good guys? Are they bad guys? So I could imagine that with enough research, it would interest them. It would interest them. I know it would interest me just because I know Tony Ferguson. I always felt that his next move would have been a return to the UFC, probably the Nate Diaz fight, just because, close out that trilogy. It's the most recognizable name for the casual boxing fan too. I know it. I didn't see the first fight. I saw the second fight. And I'd be interested in watching the third fight.
Now, yeah, good point about Nate Diaz being known more to the boxing fans, especially because of the Andre Ward connection. That's obvious. Boxing fans are a little bit more aware of Nate Diaz. I totally lost my point right there. I had a great question. My bad. Anthony.
I got one for you, man.
Okay.
Well, as far as there's a reason why I didn't like name check Tony Ferguson as a good as like a marquee opponent for Conor. And despite how great he is, like, Ferguson is a fantastic fighter, and I can't wait to see him get down again. And I think him and Conor would be a very interesting matchup. However, Ferguson was, he was there in LA for the World Tour. He's trying to taunt Conor. He's tweeting, and he's been doing this for several months now. These tweet storms against Conor, trying to draw up attention. It's been footage of him training and boxing gyms and whatnot, trying to get ready for a potential Conor fight. And nobody cared. Like, nobody cared. Then you look at Kevin Lee, who has been able to garner interest in his one main event against Michael Chiesa. And the main talk after that fight was him challenging Tony Ferguson on the post-fight show on Fox. And also, Kevin Lee has a Mayweather connection. Kevin Lee is from the same town as Floyd Mayweather. He's one of Floyd Mayweather's frequent sparring partners at the Mayweather Boxing Club. So if they really want to dig into that angle, if Kevin Lee does what he's supposed to do, win that fight, says what he's supposed to say to garner some more attention, and let the promotion do what it's supposed to do, those connections will come up, and that will pique the interest of a boxing fan.
I remember my point, and that was actually another good point, Ant. I don't know if Tony Ferguson does it. I think Tony Ferguson is very awkward. For some reason, when I watch Tony Ferguson or I watch him try to sell a fight or do his promo, do his thing, it's almost cringeworthy to me. It's almost like when Rory McDonald tries to do it. Like, it just seems so forced. It doesn't seem natural. It doesn't seem effortless.
It's a step above Ben Rothwell. Like it's like almost as bad as Ben Rothwell in his pro wrestler routine. That's what it feels like to me.
See, I think Ben's is better because he knows it's stupid. Like, he knows, like, he's almost making fun of himself. Tony Ferguson's really trying to sell a fight. He's trying to cut a promo, and he can't. It just doesn't come across that way, in my opinion. And then you have like a Nate Diaz who has a lisp and who can barely talk, and he can cut a promo like it's nothing, and it seems so natural. Like, just because you can talk and you say the right things doesn't mean it comes across that way. Tone, there's a lot of different things that added into how you say something that really affects it. But I remember my point when Santiago said it. Yeah, the boxing fan or the average person might go research this stuff, blah, blah, blah. I think the average person's too lazy to do that. I think the average person that's a boxing fan that never saw a Conor McGregor fight, but saw him in that fight and is now interested in him, they're not going to go online really and break down who's in the lightweight division, who's going to be next. They might go watching Conor McGregor highlights. That's about the extent of it, in my opinion. I think it's the promoter's job to put Kevin Lee, to put Tony Ferguson, to put Khabib, to put Nate Diaz, to put them out into everyone's face, to make them public, to make them into the public consciousness in a way. That's what a promoter does. It makes it so you don't have to go do the research. And, you know, I know a lot of people in the media get on the UFC about lack of promotion, really, lack of true promotion. The idea that you don't just push the brand and you just step back and you hope guys become stars based off of your brand. The idea is to actually sell people, put them in front of eyes, put them in front of people in seats, and sell them as an individual. I don't think the UFC is doing that for Tony Ferguson. I don't think they're doing that for Kevin Lee. And they for sure as hell ain't doing that for Nate Diaz. Regardless of all three of those men's potential stardom or their stardom right now, the UFC is not pushing them individually. They're still pushing the brand, number one. So I don't know if that happens. And I don't know if we're going to see a 1.5 million pay-per-view gate just because it's Conor McGregor and Tony Ferguson, or just because it's Conor McGregor and Kevin Lee. Maybe now because of the Mayweather fight, and like a lot of people are saying, McGregor's now on that throne. Regardless of the loss, he's now on that throne of being the top star in combat sports, regardless of that L. So maybe he just naturally by himself brings in those eyes. But to put into relativeness of his last pay-per-views in the UFC, I don't see Tony Ferguson doing the Eddie Alvarez pay-per-view. That was the first one in New York that had 3 title fights on it. That had a lot going into it. The UFC pushed every button they could in the industry, in the media, in the establishment to make that thing an event. And it was. Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor, both fights were just so organically vitriolic that it sells to the casual fans. And that was easy to sell. UFC didn't push that. Those guys pushed themselves. Nate Diaz went on a fucking media tour on Conan O'Brien, for God's sake. I mean, I never thought I would see a day where Nate Diaz is on late night talk shows. And he did that. And he did that on his own will with his own people. The UFC did not do that for him. They didn't. So I don't know really, like you said, Kevin Lee has every potential to be the next star in the UFC. The way he dresses, the way he talks, the way he can naturally sell a fight, the way that he naturally creates incidents. He naturally created that Michael Chiesa incident. Yes, Michael Chiesa was the one that got up and ran over and got decked in the face to create that fucking internet viral video. But Kevin Lee is the one that really started that. Kevin Lee's ability to invoke something out of people, whether it's love, whether it's laughter, whether it's hatred. He has that. I don't know if the UFC is going to push every button for it because they don't do it for a lot of people and a lot of black athletes. Let's just be honest. I'm kind of done on McGregor Mayweather, just like you, Ant. I'm officially like over it. This is me. Like these are my last thoughts on this event. I don't want to talk about it on radio anymore. So do you guys have any final thoughts on this topic before we go to the next one?
My final thought will be, I'm right there with you. Let's never speak of this again.
My final thoughts are people talk about this enough as it is, when we go to the gym. So I don't think there needs to be any more said about this.
We're still talking about this, for God's sake. Come on, people. Get over it.
I'm gonna add one more thing. Just one more thing. For all the boxing diehards and all the MMA diehards, knock that shit off. Let's be reasonable. We were entertained. It is what it is. Both sports are just fine as a result. I was at the Triple G Canelo Open workout 2 days after Mayweather McGregor, and there was a capacity crowd at LA Live. Boxing is doing just fine. And I was just at a Ruckus event in Tachi Palace for Invicta 25. Both sports are just fine. Let's get over it, gentlemen.
And now on to another happy topic. Jon Jones, being Jon Jones. I haven't really been had a chance to weigh on it. I know you have, Anthony, quite often on the podcast. I know Jordan Breen really got into it. And I echoed a lot of his sentiments when it was briefly brought up on the Boxing Voice. Actually, one of the callers asked me about Jon Jones. I mean, what do we make of this? I mean, does this... I was at the point of saying Jon Jones is the best MMA fighter I've ever seen, that he was the pound-for-pound best ever. He was TBE in my book. I kind of threw out the first PED positive test because it happened to MMA. Let's be honest. Whether it was dick pills or not the first time or the second time, I threw it out because we had Josh Barnett get tested how many times, get positive tests. So I'm just over it. I really am. Gilbert Melendez, one of the greatest people in the sport, one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He popped, for God's sake. Anderson Silva popped. So, I mean, like, it's one of those things where it's a little bit different. In boxing, you get villainized a lot. Look at Povetkin. But, man, I don't think, based off of Jon Jones's history, that he can even come back from this in a way that's the same. I think he has a different case than a lot of different guys for a lot of different reasons as to why he can't bounce back from this in the same way. That this is like a Barry Bonds sort of test where, regardless of him being Hall of Fame before the steroids, it's going to forever affect the way the fans look at him. He won't get the benefit of the doubt. Jon Jones won't get that, in my opinion. I mean, Anthony, what's your overall take on this scandal, on what's next for Jon Jones, his legacy, how it's all affected? Can the fans forgive him? I think that word's kind of a bad word because we've forgiven Mike Tyson for raping someone, for God's sake. I mean, we in combat sports forgive a lot of people for doing a lot of awful things. But do you see the fans getting over it? Do you see the fans the same way we did for this one? We did accept Jon Jones back. The fans loved Jon Jones after this positive test for some reason. It was the exact opposite. He was hated more before he tested positive for the first test than he did, and then he was after. Does that happen again here, or is it done? Is he done at this point?
I don't think that he'll ever be the same from this. Unless, of course, there's, the conspiracy theories that are being floated around his gym come true, and it's, some diehard Cormier fan, snuck Turnaball into his water at dinner the night before the fight. Other than that, no, we're not going to go back to that. And being there for the buildup of 214, it was pretty interesting to watch the interaction he had with the fans. Like, the fans loved him. He got cheered everywhere. The open workout, he stopped. He got into the cage, decided he wasn't going to work out. And he said, I'm going to spend the time signing autographs and I'm going to take pictures with everybody in the building. And as long as the security let him, he was taking pictures and signing autographs and hanging out with people. And he just garnered all this positivity around him. The talk among the media were like, wow, Jon seems really sincere. Like this seems genuine. Maybe he's actually changed. You know, being, you know, cage side for his fight with Cormier and seeing the crowd respond to both gentlemen was so interesting. So Jones, of course, gets this great applause as he's entering the cage. You know, great applause as he wins. Cormier was halfway booed, halfway cheered. But after the fight, you know, as he's crying in the post-fight speech, you know, the people start, you know, there was a bit of jackassery going on where there were some people who decided it was funny and they wanted to laugh. But then there were a lot of people who were cheering for Cormier. And one thing that the broadcast didn't show was that afterward, when he's leaving the cage, he walks past press row, and the fans that are still there trying to get pictures and glimpses of everybody leaving their spots. They are cheering on Cormier, telling him to keep your head up, telling him you're still a champ, you're still number one, you're still the best. They're telling him all these words of encouragement. And I think when I was seeing that emotion sway that way for Daniel when he was so hated, I think it's going to sway the opposite direction for Jones, considering he's the one that put Cormier in this position. It's really interesting to see, like, the goodwill that we had left. I think is gone now. You get one shot, in my opinion. You get one shot to have your massive screw up. That one shot should have passed when he wrapped his Bentley around the telephone pole with two hookers in the car. That one shot should have passed when he tested positive for coke 2 weeks before he was supposed to fight Daniel Cormier the first time. That one shot should have passed when he broke a pregnant woman's arm in a felony hit and run and ran back to the car to grab his stash of cash and left his weed pipe. Oh, and his Nevada State Athletic Commission papers. You know, and then that one shot should have disappeared when he took a gas station dick pill and decided it was okay. And that's what we're going to fight with.
Like, that's the thing.
Yeah, if that's even true. If that's even true, giving him the benefit of the doubt on that. We can't keep giving someone the benefit of the doubt if they continually make really stupid mistakes, especially after something like this. There should be no instances of a tainted supplement when you've used that defense already. Your team is supposed to be so meticulous. You're supposed to be so meticulous. You're supposed to be watching every little thing. And to me, it says this. It says that Jon Jones was busted because of a math error, something careless. Something didn't cycle out properly. I've heard the theory floated around that during a weight cut, you know, your urine will be more concentrated. So maybe it showed up on the urine test then because he was in the middle of his weight cut. But either way, it just doesn't look good for somebody that's supposed to be the greatest fighter of all time, by far the greatest talent we've ever seen. He is the greatest talent that's ever stepped foot in that cage, and probably will be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Jon Jones beat Ryan Bader, got that, you know, late notice title fight against Shogun. I remember watching that live and him falling on his knees, and I was like, this guy is going to be the next guy. He's going to be the guy to carry the sport over in ways that George St. Pierre tried and almost did, in ways that Brock Lesnar sort of did, but only for one market. In a lot of ways, I thought he was going to be the guy. And it's just sad, to be honest. It's one of those things where, you know, like a Bronx Tale, you know, it always comes to my head, you know, the saddest thing in life is wasted talent, you know. Jon Jones had more talent than the entire UFC light heavyweight division combined. And he
is the light heavyweight division.
He is. And the fact that we had the second best light heavyweight ever also in his era, we had this great natural rivalry. We had it all. And he screwed it up. He did. He screwed up his legacy. He screwed up the light heavyweight division's legacy moving forward. He screwed up Daniel Cormier's legacy. He screwed up a lot of things. I just don't know really the effects of it. Like, what do we see 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line that we go, this is the effects of Jon Jones being the biggest waste of talent the sport has ever seen? Do we see another guy like a Jon Jones who has those issues change? Actually learn from Jon Jones' mistake? I don't know if we're gonna get that. I don't. It's just one of those things where in sports in general, especially combat sports, we get people from walks of life that that are a certain way, that are a little bit wild, that do stupid, careless shit, that have a few screws loose. Jon Jones is definitely that. Regardless of him at the beginning trying to be the preacher's kid, he always had a few screws loose. He was always a cocaine addict. He was always a partier. He was always a screw up. And we just never saw it because God gave him every ounce of talent you could imagine. And he had the IQ for the sport. He had the mind for the sport. And it's just sad. It truly is sad. This would be like Muhammad Ali becoming a cocaine addict and not fighting Joe Frazier 3 times, not fighting George Foreman. That's what this is like. This is our Muhammad Ali. This is our greatest ever screwing up in a way that he didn't need to. Because he was the greatest.
Absolutely.
He doesn't need the steroids. Same with Barry Bonds. That's why Barry Bonds, I think, is the greatest example, because a lot of people still argue this day Barry Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame because he was a Hall of Fame hitter before he started taking steroids. And regardless of what we think about when Jon Jones started taking steroids, when, does this taint his whole legacy? I think we can say without a doubt that you take every steroid out of Jon Jones and he still beats Daniel Cormier twice. He still beats everyone in the light heavyweight division as many times as he wants. He can still move up to heavyweight division and beat Stipe Miocic, beat Brock Lesnar. He is that sort of guy without the steroids. I just don't know. It's one of those things where it's like the Anderson Silva test. I remember when that happened, it kind of shook me in a bit, in a way of just my faith in the sport, my faith in the reality of it all in a lot of ways. It was one of those events that I think we're going to talk about for a very long time. This scandal, this legacy tarnishing event that the likes of which we have not seen in this sport. We may have seen in other sports, we have not seen in this one. And you can argue this is probably the biggest waste of talent in sports history. You can make that argument. And just extremely sad to say. Santiago, I know you as a casual fan know Jon Jones. I know you've seen his fights. I know you think of him being a very great fighter. As somebody that has more of a casual vested interest in Jon Jones in MMA as a sport, do you forgive him? Even if it comes out that he's dirty, all this stuff, he serves his sentence, he's still young enough to where he can come back after 3 or 4 years, and he could probably win the title. Let's be honest. Jon Jones at 33 or 34 years old still probably beats almost everyone in the light heavyweight division. So do you forgive him, Santiago? Do you think the casual fan forgives Jon Jones?
Well, given the nature of PED usage in boxing alone, obviously we look down on people who pop for it. Povetkin, a very prime example of what happened with the week of his fight with Deontay Wilder. And I don't know if I forgive him, to be frank, but because of just how things have been playing out in his life thus far, I'll probably remember him in the same ilk that I remember a Johnny Tapia or a Victor Ortiz. Johnny Tapia, his entire career, plagued with drug abuse, and you saw how good he was as a fighter, and it made you wonder if he was completely clean, just how good could he have been. Victor Ortiz,
Edwin Valerio,
another prime example, especially with that head injury that he suffered with that motorcycle engine, that's how I end up remembering a guy like Jon Jones, in the same ilk as those guys.
I mean, he's, like in boxing right now, Adrian Broner is like the butt of every joke, right? Of being the lazy guy, wasted talent, blah, blah, blah. Jon Jones is so much worse than Adrian Broner. So much worse.
And that's saying something considering.
You're right, Santiago. It's saying something considering the what Adrian Broner was once touted as and what his fall was. His fall was his own mistakes. It was similar to Jon Jones in a lot of ways. But he never took steroids. Like, God honest truth. And yeah, like you can probably make the argument of USADA, like we don't have like random drug testing in boxing like we do in the UFC. But still, I mean, Jon Jones is a different level entirely. I don't know if we're going to ever see something similar to a Jon Jones type of scandal where we have the greatest of all time fall down. Like fucking Armstrong. What's his name? The cycler. Why am I forgetting his name so bad?
Oh my God. Armstrong.
Lance Armstrong. Like that's the closest thing, right? I would say.
Probably. But what I think is the worst part about this whole Jon Jones thing is not the conversation that we'll have in 10 years, like, okay, this is clearly the effect of what he's done. It's the conversation that we have in 10 years of all the things that didn't happen because of the wasted career. You know, we're looking at the same guy who within a year's time got dropped by Nike and Reebok in a sport that struggles to get A-level sponsorships. You know, we're talking about a guy who, like, we just got finished talking about.
He was going to fight
exactly. We're talking about a guy who could fight Brock Lesnar next for like the biggest mixed martial arts bout ever. Who I probably would favor to beat Stipe Miocic for the heavyweight title. Then you're talking about we just talked about Mayweather and McGregor. McGregor got to this point after clearly having a bad loss to Nate Diaz and a razor-thin decision victory, and somehow or another he still finds a way to talk himself into a Floyd Mayweather bout where he'll probably walk away with about $150 million. Jon Jones, had he not screwed up all these different times, we might be talking about him fighting Anthony Joshua for a similar payday. We might be talking about all sorts of great things that we really can't quite imagine because he hasn't let it happen. You know, and all he had to do was not do blow just yet. Just wait till you retire. Like that's it. You know, enjoy the fact that you are the most gifted athlete.
Be Roberto Duran, just do blow in the off season. Like don't do fights. Like come on.
And you know, just really silly things that just make no logical sense. So this is the conversation we're having. We're gonna have that conversation about what could have been. It's going to be, and it's going to go past, you know, what if Randy Couture fought Fedor Emelianenko? It's going to go beyond that because we're going to talk about what could have been for an entire career of the greatest talent we've ever seen. That is the true tragedy.
He would have gone up to heavyweight and hypothetically beat every single one of those top guys. Imagine you throw Jon Jones' resume up and instead of stopping at Daniel Cormier at this fight, and now it's probably going to be turned into no contest. I don't even know if they're going to change it to no contest. I haven't really looked into it. Maybe you know more about that.
It depends on the beast sample.
Oh, that's right. Good point.
Yeah.
You know, we could have added Verdum, Alistair Overeem, Stipe Miocic, Cain Velasquez, you know, Brock Lesnar. You throw those 5 names on top of his already amazing resume, it's unbeatable. It's unbeatable. What he could have done in the industry and the sport. It was just, like you said, he could have been the spot that McGregor was in. He could have been that spot earlier. He was the youngest champion ever. He was a champion at 22, 23 years old. I mean, not even Canelo was that. Let's just be honest here. So I just think that it's just a really sad case of wasted talent. You know, the saddest thing in life is wasted talent. Shout out to the Bronx Tale. You know, what's next for the light heavyweight division? I think that's really the final question we can ask in this story, or in this topic. You know, how do they? Let's assume the B sample comes up hot. Let's assume he's gone for the next 3 years or so. What's next for the light heavyweight division? Do they just throw Gustafsson, Daniel Cormier again for a vacant title? Do they throw in Ozdemir? Volkan Ozdemir, whatever his name is, do they throw that in to throw the winner of OSP, Shogun Rua 2, and a title eliminator afterwards? You know, like there's what's next for this division?
We're left with scraps at the 205-pound division. Like the 205-pound division is really sad looking. I mean, really, what could happen? One possibility is that B sample comes back positive, then it will be changed to a no contest. In which case, it will be like the fight didn't take place, which would mean Daniel Cormier would be the champion again. Vote a guy as champion after we saw him get head kick knocked out, you know, just a month ago. So that leaves a big question mark on how do you promote that? What do you do with that bit of information? Then, okay, the vacant title fight. I would definitely be high on a Cormier versus Gustafsson rematch for a vacant strap. And that makes sense as far as the rankings go. But still, those are 2 guys that Jon Jones beat. You know,
and let's be honest,
and
DC,
yeah, that's a sad look.
Away from retirement. DC is what, 36 years old? DC,
38, I think.
Yeah. He's 38. Damn. So I mean, like,
I think he's 38. Yeah.
There's no one guy the UFC can look at and go, "Wait, we're going to line this guy up for a title shot. He's going to win the belt. In the meantime, he's going to hold the division down until Jon Jones gets back." There's no that guy. Volkan Ozdemir is not that guy.
I mean, it would be prime time for a guy like Chris Weidman to move up to 205.
Agreed.
I think that could bring some much needed life in the division. But aside from that, you know, granted, I'm sure there's some prospects out there, but there's really not much at 205. We don't have much to look forward to in that division. And it's a shame because that was, at one point in time, was the marquee division for the UFC. That was Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Randy Couture, Rashad Evans, Lyoto Machida. You know, some of those names of which Jon Jones dispatched. It's really sad. Like it puts guys like us at a loss of words. Like, where do we go? I mean, I'm of the mind where, for instance, for the first PED violation that he had when he was suspended during that time, and it was all this talk about, well, Jon Jones this, Jon Jones that. I went on record saying, hey, right now, Jon Jones doesn't exist. Like, he does not exist. We need to not talk about him in this picture if he's not eligible to fight. And that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to move on and literally pretend like he doesn't exist. And it's a shame that we're going to have to do that, but how else does the division move on? We can't, like, it's not fair to anyone else out there fighting by the rules, that's doing everything by the book, doing what they're supposed to do, training clean, and, you know, and passing the drug tests, and not, you know, crashing their cars into pregnant women. We can't punish them because this guy decides that the rules don't matter to him.
Yeah, I mean, I can't add anything else to that. I just think the light heavyweight division is definitely in a tough spot right now. And in the next 12 months are going to be highly interesting to see what the UFC does, because they let go a bunch of guys, top guys. They let go of Phil Davis. They let go of the Ryan Baders of the world.
Yeah, Nikita Krylov is gone as well.
Yeah, which
that's a name you could have used.
That made no sense. The
dumbest thing ever.
The Al Capone.
Yeah, they let go Gegard Mousasi, who was a 205-pound champion in Strikeforce. They let him go. Yeah, you probably wish you had Gegard right now.
Yeah, easily. So I don't know what they do, because every move up to this point has been to weaken that division, and now you lost the best ever and the champion of that division. It's going to be very interesting to see what the UFC does. Santiago, any final thoughts on this topic before we go on?
No, not really. I mean, you guys pretty much said everything that needs to be said regarding, you know, this entire endeavor that is the Jon Jones story.
Yeah, now I mean, do we want to touch on UFC Rotterdam that was yesterday? I don't think you've seen it, Santiago, but I know Anthony saw it. Do you want to address it at all? Stefan Struve, Alexander Volkov, the other fight.
Yeah, that was an excellent fight. Excellent main event.
To see two guys
that was fantastic.
Fight like that was highly impressive.
You know, and this was the first time I've actually watched a fight with someone really tall like that and actually thought that the height became a disadvantage. Like, Struve's kicks move so slow, at least his roundhouse kicks. His front kicks look pretty fast and pretty efficient, but I thought, like, him trying to throw high roundhouse kicks, they just seemed so slow. It's like all this space to get up there to kick the other guy in the head. That was the one time that was like, wow, that's a disadvantage of being tall. But other than that, both of those guys put forth an excellent display. The good and bad of what Stefan Struve has always offered. He's always been a really tough guy who, when he starts gaining momentum, he's hard to stop. But man, when that momentum comes to a halt, when you disrupt what he's trying to do, he falls like a ton of bricks. And it's a shame, you know, a guy so young has had so many miles worn on him in the sport. But I really don't see, despite how thin the heavyweight division is, I don't see Stefan Struve making a legitimate run after this.
No, I don't either. I think the book has been written on Stefan Struve for a while, and unfortunately, I think it was Breen who said this, that he was just a guy that got beat up in Dutch kickboxing camps and in gyms since he was the age of 10, 5, you know. So he was put through the ringer at a much earlier age. He has over 40 fights at the age of 28 or something like that. He does have a ton of miles. He's 28 going on 40, for God's sake. A younger
with a heart condition.
With the heart condition. So I think Stefan Struve did look old. He looked old in there at a certain point. I think the first round and a half or so, he was catching him at the end of his punches. I think he was working the better game. I think he was controlling Volkov. And then, like you said, he just folded. Once they got disrupted in any way, which was really the boxing, the combinations of Volkov, he was just lighting him up with those short little uppercuts on the inside, blah, 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 and he was just out of there. For a guy that big, that tall, his hand speed was quite impressive, and the way he was able to get around the guy, sidestep him, and create boxing angles was impressive out of Volkov. I think he's definitely a prospect to watch, or a contender to watch in the heavyweight division. And I think Stefan Struve is just that gatekeeper. He's the guy that if you beat him, you belong in that top 15, top 10 easily. And I think that he's going to be around for a bit. He's just that guy. He's the new Roy Jones, where he's just going to be put in there with everyone the UFC wants to sort of get some legitimacy to. Say, hey, if you fight Stefan Struve, we know you're the real deal. If you fight Roy Nelson back in the day, you were the real deal. It's similar that way. Gabriel Gonzaga was that for a little bit as well as a couple other guys, And I think that's a fine lane to be in. I think Stefan Struve is still going to make money. I think he's still going to get fights in the UFC. He's still going to get wins. He's still going to get losses because of his skill set, of his ground game, of his striking. He's still going to beat a lot of heavyweights. It's the heavyweight division, for God's sake. Volkov, I think, is just a truly gifted fighter. He's a guy that will give Stefan Struve some issues in maybe a year.
Right, and Stefan Struve also can obviously still draw in his home country.
Yeah,
he's a guy that can always put butts in seats. So the UFC will definitely have some use for him in the future. He really, he's always kind of been a gatekeeper, which is kind of strange to think. Early on in his career, guys like Roy Nelson and Junior Dos Santos kind of got over by fighting him.
Travis Brown, another one.
Travis Brown, good example. That was one of the nastiest knockouts I can ever remember. And all three of those fights actually pretty nasty knockouts that Struve suffered. The Mark Hunt fight was what one of the things that propelled Mark Hunt to get an interim title shot against Verdun. So Struve has always been in this role. It's just that when we saw his full potential really only one time, and that was against Stipe, where he knocked Stipe out. When we saw him, use his range effectively, keep his opponent at the end of his punches, mix things up, and have a particular killer instinct about him. That's something that we haven't seen a lot of. The best example outside of the Stipe fight, Silva, but that's at a time where Bigfoot Silva is barely a reputable name anymore.
He's barely a live body in there at this point. He's on that Bob Sapp territory where he gets hit, he's just done.
Oh yeah, prepare him to go down against Rico Van Hooven. Oh my God, I can't believe they made that fight. What a travesty! That is.
Rico's gonna kill him.
That oh my God, whoever booked that fight should be arrested. That's just wrong. That's horrible. Just what are we doing with our lives? We're talking about this inhumane, disgusting. I feel dirty talking about Bigfoot Silva versus Rico Van Hooven. Let's change the subject, man. I'm about to get emotional.
Yo, did you see Bob Sapp's last fight a couple weeks ago?
Did it end with him tapping?
Yeah. I think he took one, and he was just no, I'm good. He just bowed down. He was I'm good.
You seen one, you seen them all. That is Bob Sapp.
But yeah, I think Volkov is definitely a guy that he's going to be in some good fights. I definitely don't think he's a star. I think the UFC will definitely use him as just a name and just a body in the division. The heavyweight division's always been weak in a lot of ways, so you just need guys there. And a lot of the guys are getting old. Cain Velasquez, he doesn't have a fight lined up. God knows what the commissions are going to allow him to do just because he smoked some weed.
How dare he?
Yo, at least it was.
Yeah,
no, sorry, go.
Oh no, you're all right, man. Volkov, man, I think he can do some damage though. The age is definitely a big factor. It's you don't have too many young guys at heavyweight that are out there making noise. Derek Lewis comes to mind. Stipe still got some youth.
You never know about the dedication. Derek Lewis to me seems a guy that he doesn't really like the sport. He just does it.
Well, yeah, I disagree with him. I think Derek Lewis, he may not necessarily love mixed martial arts, but he likes to hit people. He likes.
Okay.
I think he likes to be in the UFC. He enjoys like the violence of it, and I think he is also very dedicated to his craft. I mean, despite the persona that he puts on, we've seen like great technical improvements with him. Definitely some glaring holes in his game by far. But the fact that he was in the Gabriel Gonzaga fight, Gonzaga mounted him, and he was able to get out of that. The original Derek Lewis that we saw enter the UFC would have ever done anything like that. So Derek Lewis with some more tutelage can do some damage. I think him and Volkov would make an excellent match in the next year or so. If Derek Lewis can get past Verdum coming up soon.
I wonder if Hurricane Harvey, obviously prayers and thoughts for everyone in Houston right now. I wonder if that's going to affect his upcoming fight at all. In terms of them having to postpone it, anything like that, him having to postpone his training. I don't know the situation down there with him, to be honest, but I wonder if that's going to play a factor. Because that is a good fight, and it's only like a month away at this point. It's in October, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah, I would be very surprised if that fight went on that schedule. I mean, he's as we speak, he's most likely down there rescuing people. That's what he was doing all last week, was riding around in his big truck and like a little raft or something, was rescuing people.
With who's that rapper out of Houston? Is it
Truth?
Yeah. They were putting in work, man. Shout out to those guys.
Yeah, that's beautiful work, man, that they were doing.
And
great stuff that they were doing.
Easily, yeah, great stuff. That just shout out to them. Prayers and thoughts to everyone over there. But back to Derek Lewis. I don't know really if the fight goes on as planned, and let's say he does have the training, like this doesn't get in the way of anything. That's a tough fight. Fabricio Verdum's a very tough fight. I don't know if Derek Lewis gets past that, and he's another guy where if he somehow became champion, you could sell Derek Lewis easily.
Oh, yeah.
You could easily make him into a star. I don't know if the UFC does it, though. I don't know if the UFC is willing to push those buttons for him.
No, he's like Derek Lewis is the Black Diaz brother. Like, this is not a guy that they're gonna sell. You think about how the Diaz brothers have been doing what they've been doing for years, and they've had this massive cult following amongst the hardcores for years. And the UFC just realized, hey, we got something here. This when Rafael dos Anjos broke his foot on his training partner's elbow before 196, that's when they finally realized, oh, we might need these Diaz guys. It's a pretty interesting dynamic. Like, Derek Lewis is the black version of that. He is a brother that should have been a Diaz,
who definitely goes on drum, who definitely doesn't really, he's not the company man. He's not Chuck
No,
Liddell.
he's not. But he's gonna get the attention for the right reasons. He's gonna get the attention not for doing stupid things, but for saying crazy things that are entertaining and for going out there and putting on exciting fights. And that's, I mean, he is a master of self-promotion in that respect, and not self-promotion to where it's the Ben Rothwell pro wrestling routine or the cringeworthy Tony Ferguson tweet storm. It's not on that level. It's like, this is genuinely him. This is his personality he's putting forth, and like it or love it, this is what he's going to do. But you know what? You put a camera in front of him, and it'll sell.
The memes he made of Ronda and Travis Brown were the best memes I've ever seen in my life. And I like Ronda, and I was a Travis Brown fan, to be honest, back in the day. Like, I remember when he knocked out Stefan Struve, I'm like, yo, Travis Brown's going to be the next champion. He's going to hold the division down. I was that guy, right? But man, those memes were the best memes of all time in combat sports history. That guy should be in charge of the UFC's social media department. Like, Derek Lewis should be in charge of the UFC's Twitter account.
Derek Lewis needs an executive position with WME-IMG. The guy is an absolute genius. I love everything he says and does. And I'm supposed to be, journalistic integrity and all that. I'm not supposed to play favorites. I love some Derek Lewis. I am all aboard the Derek Lewis hype train. Win or lose, that guy is so entertaining, and he's something that the sport needs. I mean, you alluded to it earlier, how the UFC does a very poor job of marketing black fighters, and that's something, a beat that I've been playing on the SRN for a little while now. That's a glaring omission to their fan base. A guy like Derek Lewis is somebody that can help change that. You know, the Diaz brothers, you know, in their own way have brought over some boxing fans. They've brought over some Hispanics. They've done some things that they've also obviously lightened up the mood on weed culture in mixed martial arts.
Definitely.
They've brought some very important demographics that the UFC doesn't either know how to or care how to market to. And Derek Lewis is of that same ilk.
Which do you think it is? Do you think it's not knowing how to do it or not caring?
I think it's more not knowing. I'm at least when I think about certain fighters, like I think about a guy like Tyron Woodley. I'll think about let's see who else. A guy like Demetrius Johnson, who's going to be coming up this Saturday. Like, they just don't know what to do, and they're trying, because the UFC follows a very particular way that they like to do things. It's going to be the commercial with the highlight of a head kick or a ground and pound, and you're going to hear Goldberg saying, "Oh," and Joe Rogan's going to say, "Oh, he knocked him out," and it's all over. They're going to have that same commercial run, and it's going to be the poster with the faces and something in the background. It's a very formulaic thing that they do, and whenever somebody comes around that disrupts that formula, they have no idea what to do. There should be some effort put toward guys who don't fit that cookie cutter mold, the guys that don't look like Sage Northcutt and Paige Van Zandt, that are just themselves, and they don't. Oh, they're just themselves, you know. And there's a big lack of that. They don't. The UFC. I mean, I guess the advantage of it is it encourages some form of self-promotion. If you're motivated enough, you can make yourself into a Conor McGregor. But aside from that, I mean, a Conor McGregor is a rare thing.
Yeah, it is. That's a unicorn right there. It truly is. You know, you think that with the UFC buyout, with the new owners being basically Hollywood talent agency, like being the people that work with the stars, that work with the biggest head cases in Hollywood, they would know how to work with different personalities and know how to work with different demographics. You would think WME would be the people to know how to take an entertainment-based product and sell it to any demographic. You would think they would know how, and sort of, it's where that trend within the UFC continued throughout Zuffa and to the WME era. That the idea that Rashad Evans could, like, the UFC wouldn't promote him, or they couldn't promote him back in the day. And they would promote a Rampage Jackson because he's a caricature of the black culture, unfortunately. But in today they don't promote, like you said, Tyron Woodley, Demetrius Johnson. They had an issue promoting Daniel Cormier, even though I think they did put some effort in Daniel Cormier. I think that was obviously added context to the Jon Jones situation. But with Demetrius Johnson and Tyron Woodley, you see them not knowing how to do it. You see Tyron Woodley being on Straight Out Content, one of the biggest movies of recent years, really. And that being a sponsor at a UFC event, and them not even make mention that their champion is in the movie. Like,
and that was ridiculous. That was the worst oversight ever. Like, Betch Kohea face planted on that logo, and there was no mention whatsoever that Tyron Woodley, who at the time was, I believe he was the #1 contender.
Yeah, you're right. He was number 1.
I think he was nursing a broken foot at the time, but that guy was waiting in the wings for his title shot, and you didn't mention it at all. That's ridiculous. You know, Jordan brought this up too, and I was surprised I didn't mention it first. Tyron Woodley was on Sway.
Yes.
And he on Sway and
killed it.
Murdered his freestyle. Murdered it. And the UFC barely retweeted that. Like, barely got a retweet.
And I never saw that. I never saw it. I never once saw the UFC ever push that. I found it on YouTube one day because I love those radio shows. I love Ebro. I love Breakfast Club. I love Everyday Struggle. I love those shows, right? So I remember I found that on YouTube once. I was like, oh, Woodley was on Sway? I mean, watch this. I sat down and watched it for 30 minutes, and I thought it was great. I thought, why isn't UFC putting this out all over the place? All over the place. That's how you sell it.
Like, he bodied it, and nobody heard it. Like, it's very interesting that they are throwing these alley-oops, and nobody's catching it and just putting it in the basket. That I find to be absolutely ludicrous. You're like, the UFC has sat on gold mines throughout history and has not known how to capitalize on it. Now, I think maybe we're beginning to see some of that tide shift with the WME IMG era, since we've just come off of Conor McGregor being lent to the boxing world. We're seeing things are going to bring more star power. Hopefully we are seeing a shift. Not to say I don't want to see a bunch of crossover matches. I definitely don't want to see that.
I see what you're saying, though. Yeah.
But to see some experimentation done as far as the marketing, as far as the things that are going to get people's attention to their fighters. But one thing that I think is a possibility, which kind of makes me nervous, which could definitely be a downside of this. WME IMG owns plenty of other entertainment properties. They have their hands in movies, TV, music, you name it, they have their hand in it. But are we going to see where they take the UFC and treat it as just another entertainment property that can cross over with the others, and the matchmaking isn't as serious, where there isn't a merit-based championships being the rule of the day, where you take a guy and you can lend him to another world, and because you own this huge entertainment umbrella, you get a cut of everything. So does it matter to WME if Tyron Woodley is making money in the cage for them, or if he's making it on a movie set, or if he's making it on a TV show or whatever else? They still get a cut. So maybe that is a downside to this, that WME is going to focus more on the overall entertainment as opposed to sports entertainment.
Well, for some guys, that's good. Like for Demetrius Johnson, let's say, he should be promoted in a way that's different than, let's say, the Kevin Lee Michael Chiesa fight. That was a traditional UFC promo. Two guys had an altercation at a press conference / weigh-in. We're going to show that over and over again because that's just the classic, caveman mentality of, oh, these guys don't like each other, they hit each other. We need to.
By the way, don't do that. Slap on the wrist. Don't do that, gentlemen. Don't misbehave at the press conference. UFC doesn't like that. Let's run that on the commercials 7 times in a row.
Yeah. Come on, we all know. But for a guy like Demetrius Johnson, where he is obviously a video game star with his Twitch account and everything like that, you don't put him at Comic-Con. You don't put him in situations like that. And yes, that is totally outside of what you said, that the usual way the UFC has promoted fighters. They have never put a guy in that lane and tried to sell his fighting and his fights off of a completely different lane. Tyron Woodley with hip hop would be another one. But you can do it. You can easily do it, in my opinion. Those would be cases I would say, yeah, you put those guys in other lanes, hoping that they attract a different audience to come to and pay for a fight and come and watch on Fox Sports 1 or watch on Fox or pay a pay-per-view. You're hoping that with those guys.
They did that with Paige with Dancing with the Stars, but they haven't reached beyond that traditional, this is how you make someone famous route. They haven't gone beyond the reality show to do that. So the closest I can think of CM Punk was, I don't know if he's still doing this, but at one point he was a writer for Marvel. I think he was writing Guardians of the Galaxy comics, or for Drax the Destroyer. I think that's what it was.
Really?
He was writing those comics, and there was some mention of it on the some of the pre-fight stuff. It was like, remember that pre-fight special they did before he debuted at 203? It was some mention of it in that, but beyond that, you never really heard of it again. That was the closest I can remember to the UFC, having some mention of these like alternative methods of marketing.
It's just one of those things where when you take, I think Demetrius Johnson's a perfect example, and we're probably going to talk about his fight coming up next week with Ray Borg. But you throw him on a esports live event. You throw him on Comic-Con in a booth, signing signatures. You throw him anywhere promoting the EA Sports UFC game, whatever it is, promoting video games, right? Because that's really his lane with Twitch. You don't then go on a UFC promo right before his fight and necessarily talk about that. You can if you want. But the hope is that Demetrius Johnson putting in the legwork and you pushing the buttons to make sure he's there in those locations to meet that audience and to meet that market, that they are already bought in. That incident or situation or meeting produces more fans. And then when you throw the Joe Rogan classic, in the blacklit room, talking about the fight, talking about how interesting Ray Borg is for an opponent and how these are the perfect, If you made him in the lab, you know, this is the opponent made for him. You know, if you're doing that, you don't need to talk about the video games as much. I'm okay with that. But you have to make sure that in every other media outlet he is in that day, he is talking about that. When he goes on Good Morning America, he talks about him going to the esports live event. When he talks about going to Comic-Con or whatever, you need to sell it that way. And that goes a little bit to what you're saying about how a WME could sell guys through non-traditional routes in combat sports. And I think that it's a route that we really haven't seen even boxing take. I don't think you really had ever a boxer sell themselves in a way that is the way we want a Demetrius Johnson to be sold. But I think it can happen. I think you could bring the audience in. We've seen fighters bring in new markets before, like you said with the Diaz brothers. That was a great example. The weed market. The weed market loves MMA now. They do, and they've loved it a long time because the Diaz brothers smoke weed all the time and are very open about it. Hell, there was a press conference media call where you can clearly hear Nick Diaz smoking a bong. Clearly can hear it. And then, you know, anyways, you know, like like Ronda Rousey with women, we've seen this. To think that the UFC can't bring in the black demographic, more Mexican demographic, the Asian demographic more, they can do that. They can do it absolutely, and they can bring in the casual fan market. They can bring in the people that watch the Super Bowl and the World Cup, and those are the only sporting events they watch, right? You know those people. Everyone knows those people. Mm-hmm. You want those people to start watching UFC pay-per-views, to start watching Fox Sports 1, to start watching all these products that you have, and you have to start selling them in different ways, in my opinion. Any other topic or any other point on, let's say, the UFC and their promoting work?
Well, I think we also forgot to mention another fighter that's going to be very relevant this coming Saturday. Amanda Nunes is the first openly gay UFC champion. And that's a community that has a lot of dollars to spend. A lot of marketing can go behind that has gone pretty much unnoticed. Like, that's gone really quiet, conspicuously so. Like, that doesn't really make sense that there's no real mention of that.
They mentioned it a lot with Liz Carmouche when she fought Ronda Rousey for the first time in the UFC, right? I remember that promo. I remember going to the event live. I remember at the event live, they were playing the promo of Liz Carmouche with her girlfriend talking about being gay. Like, that was cool. Like, that was really progressive, in my opinion, for an MMA crowd to see that at a live event where everyone's drunk. And they don't do that with Amanda Nunes. Like, that is a good point, that they really don't push that. You don't see, maybe I'm disconnected from the LGBT community, but I don't know what shows or TV or movies like they like a lot, but or radio shows, like, you throw Amanda Nunes in those markets, in that market, you have to do that, and she would sell. Amanda Nunes is a delightful person. I think she's great on the mic, even with her sort of like pseudo broken English. I think her English is actually a lot better than a lot of Brazilian fighters. I think she could easily sell. Plus, she knocked out Ronda Rousey. The UFC made Holly Holm, the preacher's daughter who's white, a star off of a Ronda Rousey knockout. Why can't they do that to Amanda Nunes, who's Brazilian and gay?
Right. Like, they made Miesha Tate a star after losing to Ronda. So they like, you can't do this with Amanda. Like, there's no way the UFC can like sponsor her to go to like a gay rights rally or something like that. A place where that will be much more appreciated. The fact that she's the first openly gay champion, that would make things. That's marketing 101. I'm sorry, like, that just seems so textbook and so pedestrian that people should be fired for not thinking it before we start talking about it on these airwaves.
Now, one thing I've always thought about with promoting fighters in MMA is the run. Like, MMA fighters have usually a shorter run at the top than, let's say, boxers. Like, the top boxers, the Keith Thurmans, Mayweathers, all those guys, they have a run of years, it seems. When you're at the top, you have that run. And MMA, it seems very short. It seems to me that the UFC has always been afraid of putting a lot of money into fighters that they, in their opinions, are not going to last long. That in their minds, Tyron Woodley can lose the title any second, so why put the money into it? That Amanda Nunes can lose the title in any minute. So why put the money into it? Stipe Miocic, he can lose the title at any minute. So why push the money into it? You know, I think you can go down the list and say that for a lot of champions throughout the years, that the UFC has just sort of said, what's the risk and reward here of not selling them, of not promoting them, especially if they're going to lose in the next fight. You know, I wonder if that's ever played a factor into their mindset of promoting the brand over fighters.
From what I understand with Amanda Nunes and the Ronda Rousey fight, that was a definite thing. That apparently, I want to say it was Rogan who said this on his podcast, that the executives at WME didn't even think of the possibility that Ronda could lose. And it was a foregone conclusion. She was going to win. So there was no need to market Amanda Nunes. Like he said that half of the people backstage had no idea who she was. They didn't even know her name. And she was she was not in the title challenge. She was a champion and they had no idea who she was. So that's, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't even, that just leaves me speechless. I really don't think I need to make any point beyond that because that's just silly.
It's so interesting because I think a lot of people, both in the media and in the fandom, are still working off the old paradigm of the UFC and MMA. We're still working off the Zuffa paradigm of that model of those guys working the industry in their way. And it's different. It just is different in a lot of ways. And it is similar in a lot of the worst ways, unfortunately. Again, it's one of those things where it is fairly new. You know, we still have Lorenzo Fertitta in the background. God knows what his capacity is, but he was the first one that we saw on the UFC Showtime All Access that we saw when McGregor walked in to go spar Paulie Malignaggi. Who was there to shake his hand first? It wasn't anyone from WME. It was Lorenzo Fertitta, who's no longer the owner of the company.
Right. He was also brought in to finalize negotiations to bring Weidman back.
Yes.
For the 205 card.
And that to me is highly interesting. And then obviously the Hollywood Reporter recently stated that WME recently reached out to Top Rank and tried to have a deal with Top Rank to have some sort of UFC boxing deal and to have a boxing distributor in that way. And then obviously Top Rank came back and said we're represented by CAA, and CAA is obviously the rivals to WME in terms of Hollywood talent agencies. So the conversation stopped there. But WME is making moves and they're doing a lot of things, but they don't know who Amanda Nunes is.
Yeah.
Like it's a lot of running before they're walking. A lot of that right now.
Yeah, it's a lot of really getting ahead of reality.
It's a lot of people that think they know how to run a promoting company or promotional company in combat sports that have seen it on TV that don't know how to do it.
I think what we need a liaison between the UFC and WME. We need somebody who understands the fight game from the promotional aspect of it, but also understands pure entertainment. And Dana White clearly is not that guy.
But they're going to say that's Dana White, though. Like, you know, if you or I had this conversation with anyone at the WME, they would say, but Dana White's that guy.
Yeah, it's like, wow, they have no idea what they're talking about because Dana White is clearly not that guy. And that's no disrespect to him. I mean, he is probably the greatest promoter that
Dana
we've
White
seen.
Was a great promoter. Dana White was a great promoter. Now he doesn't give a fuck. He made $400 million. He's good. He's done.
Yeah, he's importing snow into his driveway. He's good.
The Conor McGregor press conferences, like how many times would he come up and say, "Oh, I'm talking now"? Cool, Conor's here. Dude, he would just walk off. Like that was it. So Dana's different now, man. Like I don't know really what to think about the UFC, its company mandate, where they're going forward, what the company is going to look like in a couple years. I think it's going to be drastically different. I think we're in a huge transitional period for the sport of MMA. It's just a time to really pay attention to see what the moves are, to see who is being fired, to see who is being hired. Those are all very interesting moves. When they fired what was his name? Was it Eric Winter? The guy
Fight Pass.
Yeah, that to me was a big red flag. Huge red flag. That was a major concern for me. And still is.
The regional heads for like Europe and Asia and Brazil and stuff.
Been around from the beginning, and there were some great people there. I mean, I don't know really who's running the ship anymore.
You know, you would hope it's Ariel Emanuel. You would hope.
No, he's not. He's not doing it. He's not doing the day-to-day operations. Hell no,
Yeah.
he can't.
Yeah, and quite honestly, Dana White's probably too busy to do a lot of that. Also, I mean, he's running his own, though connected but separate promotion, the Contender Series. So he's running pretty much a separate promotion. He had to apply for a separate promoter's license for that. That is not the UFC that we watch on Fight Pass on Tuesday nights. That is,
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, the Dana White Contender Series is its own separate entity. So he's his own promoter, and that right. He's got a lot of things to do. He at least at one point was managing the day-to-day of every fighter getting in trouble, the Jon Joneses and the Jeremy Stevens and whatever issues were coming up. He was the one getting that phone call and handling those day-to-day things. So there's no way that he can do all this himself. And at this point, he has to be at least somewhat burnt out. He has to be.
I would be. I mean,
and who wouldn't be? As much as we love this, we will be totally burnt out. Like, I get burnt out sometimes over a week of, cover a fight, watch a couple of boxing matches and then write an article. I'm like, oh, I'm tired. I'm sick of this shit. I think we go through that sometimes. So I can't imagine what his existence must be like. But when you routinely trash your champions, you trash the people that you are going to have to promote in the future. Like, look at this, 215 coming up Saturday. We've got Demetrius Johnson and Amanda Nunes, who both in the past 2-3 months have been slandered endlessly by Dana White. Like, that is not promotion. That's not how you promote people that you are expecting us to pay money to see.
I think
that is the sign that the times have passed Dana White, I think.
This is also an issue in boxing as well, obviously on a lesser note. The idea that promoters naturally have a conflict of interest, because they are, in a sense, promoting both people in a fight. Bob Arum, in my opinion, has this issue a lot in Top Rank because he often puts on top rank fighter against top rank fighter. For a long time, my idea is, and still to this day, is that the reason we did not get Crawford versus Pacquiao is because of Bob Arum. Bob Arum represents both guys, so naturally he cannot go to bat for Crawford the way that if Crawford had his own promoter would go to bat for him, would make sure he got that fight, would try to sell that fight as much as possible, because Bob Arum has a conflict of interest. Dana White, the UFC, has a conflict of interest when they're promoting everyone. When they're promoting Amanda Nunes and Valentina Shevchenko, they naturally have a conflict of interest because a promoter, and I think Jeff Wagenheim said this very well. He said that Dana White going up actually against Showtime, going against Mayweather, was the closest we got to a vintage Dana White in a while in some instances, like when he did media scrums and stuff, because he was just going to bat for one guy. It was much easier to promote that way when it's us versus them, instead of, well, I represent both people and both parties here, so I need to maneuver in the right way. I need to sell the fight and sell the winner, but also not, hurt the loser's brand and stock so much that I can't sell them again. I just think it's a hard place for promoters. I think the job, the function of a promoter needs to change, in my opinion. I think what we see with McGregor, with Ari, I forget his last name.
Emmanuel.
No, not Ari Emanuel.
His actual manager.
His actual manager.
Yeah.
That to me,
I can't remember his name either.
That to me is what a promoter should more be like, where it's your guy. And even then, that's not the best comparison because he represents Tony Ferguson as well. So it's just one of those things where you have all these conflicts of interest in the sport from the business side. That's where we get the politics. That's where we get that side of it. With Dana White and specifically the UFC and his conflict of interest, he's always been a little bit too open about that conflict of interest. He's never been able to skirt that line and just sell the fight as a whole and not pick apart someone. He's always had that issue. And it's now we see a version of it where he doesn't care. So it's even more cavalier. It's even more like he'll just say like, well, Tyron Woodley's a head case, something like that. And he'll just move on. Back in the day, you have a FU tirade and he'll post a video on Instagram, calling you a bitch or something like that. Like the Loretta Hunt one was infamous, right? Like we don't see that anymore for a reason. but we still see it at time when he is a promoter. But then again, he's not even in front of the podium that much. So I don't know. I think Dana White, he is a dinosaur of the old paradigm, in my opinion. I think he's not going to last his full 5-year contract. There's no reason to it.
No, I mean, there's really no point. And they even just gave him more money because they bought out a little bit more of his ownership stake that he retained. So he's made somewhere around like $500 million or something just for his stake in the UFC, and he still has this high paying position that involves profit sharing. So, but rule number one, no matter what paradigm we're under, no matter what role these promoters are taking, rule number one is don't slander your champions. Do not slander your champions. I mean, that's just basic information right there. I mean, it's ridiculous that we even have to have this conversation, and that this is a regular thing. This is something that he routinely does and has conspicuously done a lot of in the past several months, while he's promoting a card Saturday with 2 of those slandered champions.
I was just about to do that segue where, speaking of people that get slandered and champions that get slandered specifically, UFC 215, Demetrius Johnson going after that record against Ray Borg and obviously Amanda Nunes versus Valentina Shevchenko. And plus there's Neil Magny versus Halfield to Sunjoust. I don't have the card in front of me. I should have the card in front of me right now, but there's a ton of good fights on the card. Gilbert Melendez versus Jeremy Stevens. Interesting, especially at 145. I don't know how Gilbert Melendez is going to look at that weight. Plus he's like 35, 36 years old. A lot of interesting things. And I mean, the genesis of a lot, not a lot, but a genesis of the public really knowing about the not hate, but beef between Dana White and Demetrius Johnson was the whole TJ Dillashaw ducking. I'm using air quotes for everyone on the podcast. I really don't want to get too far into the idea that story of Demetrius Johnson. Did he duck TJ or did he not? Because that was talked about ad nauseum. It was. I have my opinions on it. I don't think it was ducking. I think it was a missed opportunity, to be honest. I don't think it's ducking. Those two ideas are not mutually exclusive. But he is fighting Ray Borg. He is most likely beating the Anderson Silva record. I think most people are in agreement of how this fight goes down. That Demetrius Johnson's a 99 rating on a player scale, and in the UFC fight game, that he can box, he can kickbox, he can do Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he can wrestle, he can do everything at the most exceptional level. Ray Borg is going to be food for him in a lot of ways. I think like a second or third round submission, knockout, whatever Demetrius Johnson decides he's going to do it. And then we're going to have that discussion about, is he the best of all time? You know, because he beat the record. And now with Jon Jones, switching back to the Jon Jones scandal, I mean, Demetrius Johnson, without a doubt, should be pound for pound number 1 right now. But is he pound for pound the best of all time? Should we start having that argument of, well, he beat Anderson Silva's record. That definitely should mean he's better than George St. Pierre. But then again, you start looking through George St. Pierre's resume. Where does his legacy? And I think, Anthony, I know you're predicting Demetrius Johnson to win. I think everyone is. So what's your take on the legacy talk afterwards, post-fight? What's that going to be like? What's your opinions on Demetrius Johnson and his legacy and his career post Ray Borg?
Demetrius Johnson, even before this Ray Borg fight, should be on our short list of greatest fighters of all time. I mean, I think that's the easiest statement to make right there. He's done something that we very rarely see. And the other names that come to mind when you say what people have done, like, hey, Jon Jones managed to do this, Anderson Silva managed to do this, George St. Pierre managed to do this, where they take great fighters and make them look amateur, where they take a fighter that otherwise is excellent and they trash them, they dominate them, they have their way, and they make that other person look like they don't belong in a professional fight. That is a special thing right there. Like we saw, like Joseph Benavidez, who is definitely one of the best lighter weight fighters that we've ever seen.
He's still the best flyweight. You can make that argument.
Yeah, and DJ smoked him in one round with a right hand. Like Henry Cejudo, who is probably the most highly touted prospect that we've seen in years, smoked him in the first round with a knee to the body. There are incredible, like Wilson Hayes, like the submission over Wilson Hayes is exceptional. Wilson Hayes was a perennial. Yeah, Horiguchi. Like Horiguchi is one of the greatest Japanese fighters that we've ever seen come over to North America and actually have some success. And he got smashed.
John Dodson.
There's no end. Right, to the point. And John Dodson, great example. A guy who was smashing people at 135 and came down to get smashed by DJ. Like it is really interesting to see a guy as good as Demetrius Johnson, because we're witnessing history. We're witnessing something that same conversation we're going to have in 10 years about what if Jon Jones did this or did that. Right after that, if not right before, we're going to be like, did you see when Demetrius Johnson did such and such? Like that guy right there there should be monuments erected in his honor. DJ is fantastic. And I think he needs to get his just due. Hopefully this event is going to feel like a coming out party for him. That it's going to feel like something grand around him. I mean, granted, the TJ Dillashaw thing was a missed opportunity, but I think it speaks to larger issues with his fractured relationship with the UFC.
Agreed.
As far as how they approached him about it. But
I think with Demetrius Johnson is that, like you said before this fight, we can have that discussion of where does he place. That you can honestly have the argument that he is the best of all time right now. Before the Jon Jones scandal, you could have that argument, and I would entertain it. I may not agree with it, but I would definitely entertain it. I think my issue with Demetrius Johnson and his legacy and where to replace him is that we really don't have those moments. Like we can't look at a moment and say this was a transcending moment that made him great. And I know that's kind of hating because he did have some moments. Like you said, the Joseph Benavidez one-punch knockout was a moment for a lot of people that were aware. The way he dispatched everyone with such ease, the amount of fifth-round finishes he had, which I love. I thought that was kind of cool. Those were some moments, but he never had a Chael Sonnen, Anderson Silva one moment. He never had a Jon Jones, Alexander Gustafsson moment. You know, the closest was the John Dodson, the first fight. That's the closest he got to that moment, I would say. I think that hurts him in a way. Long-term legacy. That hurts him in a way. That I'm worried about people forgetting him in 40 years, 50 years. I know that's really far out there, but in 40, 50 years ago in boxing, do you remember the 122-pound champion 40 years ago? Santiago, do you remember the 122-pound champion 50 years ago?
From 40 years ago, no.
Exactly, and I call him the human box wreck, so he can't even know that. So, I mean, that's of a concern for me. So I think he's a little bit incomplete. I think his legacy is a little bit incomplete. Even though his legacy is amazing, he's without a doubt a top 4 all time. Not top 5. He is a top 4 all time. You put him up there, Jon Jones, Anderson Silva, and George St. Pierre. He belongs in that conversation. But it just seems like there's not enough, unfortunately. And he's going to break the record, and it still doesn't seem like enough. I still get images of that loss to Dominic Cruz years ago where it was arguable. He put on a hell of a fight where I thought he was going to win it, actually. He was working Dominic Cruz the first couple of rounds with his takedowns. So I think he has some unfinished business at 135. I think if you threw a Jon Jones type situation where you imagine Jon Jones as a heavyweight first, and he loses to Cain Velasquez, then moves down to light heavyweight and runs train on everyone, right? We would go back and say, well, Jon Jones lost to Cain Velasquez. Like he had to move down a division to become great. If George St. Pierre was a middleweight and he lost to Anderson Silva, then had to move down to welterweight and had that run, we would say, I think, the same about George St. Pierre is like, well, you had to move down. You lost to a guy. So I think that's always going to hurt him in a way that's unfortunate because what his run is great. Is a great run in MMA. And it's one that, like I said earlier, doesn't happen in the sport. We don't get guys having 10 title defenses. We don't get guys really having 5 title defenses. So the idea that he is going to have 11, 12, 13 possible title defenses moving forward, I mean, that's just an insane amount. And that is a great thing to do. Now, is it enough to catapult him as number one? I don't think so. I don't know. I think I don't know is maybe a better question, because what the consensus is may not be what my opinion is. I think he has some unfinished business at 135. If he went up there and beat a TJ Dillashaw or a Dominic Cruz or a Cody Garbrandt, and he only needs to beat one, he only needs to have that Forrest Griffin, and that will solidify him in a lot of ways. It will. It's unfortunate to say that we have to force a guy out of his best weight, the best weight where he excels at, a division that he has dominated for years, that we have to tell him that he has to move up to create something more for himself. Yeah, unfortunately, that's true, though. We say that to Terrence Crawford as well. Terrence Crawford over in boxing is one of the greatest boxers pound for pound right now. I would say he has the best skills in boxing today, in my opinion. But I'm still calling for him to move up to 147 to really cement his legacy. And I'm asking the same thing to Demetrius Johnson. I think after Borg, which really is an easy fight, in my opinion, stylistically, he needs to challenge himself, go out of his comfort zone, go up to 135, take on at least one fight. It doesn't have to be Cody Garbrandt, even though I think that's possibly the best fight you can make, and that would be insanely interesting to break down and watch. You're going to go fight Dominic Cruz. Go avenge that. And at this point, Dominic Cruz, with his age, with his foot issues, with his leg issues, you don't think he would beat Dominic Cruz at this point? I think he would. You avenge that loss, you instantly erase that argument. So I hope he does that next. I really hope that he gets away from that narrative of, oh, he's just a small guy beating up small guys. Like, I hate that, because it is a false narrative. What he is doing is great, but is it great enough to be the greatest of all time? I don't think so at this point.
Yeah, I kind of feel about DJ the way I feel about Redman. And hear me out on this one. So if you said Redman is the greatest rapper of all time, I don't necessarily agree, but I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to put up a fight. I'm going to shake my head and say, I see what you're saying. You know, DJ is Redman to me in that regard. He is, but he definitely can. If he breaks Anderson Silva's title defense record, which in my opinion is the greatest accomplishment that Anderson Silva has on paper, if he were to statistically surpass Anderson Silva, you know, the history books will force us to look at him in a certain light.
Yes.
That will be very clear just looking at the math. However, then, you know, the sentimental argument will have to be won at a higher weight class, unfortunately. And that's so grossly unfair to him, considering that he was able to ascend to a title challenge and only lost to the greatest bantamweight of all time.
And slightly lost.
Slightly.
I mean,
I was at that fight live. Like that was actually the first UFC event that I went to live. And and DJ put on a hell of a performance in a losing effort, but it was a hell of a performance. So to ask him to now, despite the fact that you've just run through an entire division, you know, despite what people think, you know, small guys fighting small guys are the most skilled out of fighters in any sport. He outskilled he's outskilled 11 times the number one contender at 125 pounds. Unheard of, ridiculous, you know. So it is highly unfair, but it is something that we're going to have to ask for that sentimental argument, for that moment, you know, to have the moment of Fedor getting slammed on his head by Kevin Randleman or knocking down Tim Sylvia, those other like huge moments that these all-time greats have. You know, DJ doesn't have that aside really from the Benavidez knockout. But the only way he gets that moment is at 135 against a Cody, a Dominic, or a TJ.
And like you said, like, it's unfair. I think that's the best way to describe it. But on one hand, on the other hand, it's also something that he has to do. Like, it's really two things that are not mutually exclusive. Like, we have a situation where a guy is on a great run. He is a great fighter. He's one of the greats of all time. But we ask him to do more. And yes, that is unfair, but the greats are always asked to do more. That's the unfortunate thing about being great, is that we assume for you to keep doing great things. I think that's why there's people that are a little bit upset about this fight, is that we know Demetrius Johnson's amazing. I don't think any MMA fan looks at him and goes, "Oh, he's a shit fighter." But we don't want to see necessarily shit fights. Like, we don't necessarily want to see mismatches. We don't want to see, we don't want to see Terrence Crawford fight the Felix Diaz's and Julius Ndongos of the world. We want to see him go fight the Keith Thurmans of the world. We want to go see him fight the Sean Porters, the Earl Spences, the Manny Pacquiaos, the Jeff Horns. We want to see him go fight those guys. In the same way we want Demetrius Johnson. We don't want him to fight the Ray Borgs of the world anymore. Even though Ray Borg is a fantastic top 10 flyweight. We don't want to see him fight Henry Cejudo anymore, even though he was a fantastic undefeated prospect and he's now an established top 10 flyweight. We don't want to see that anymore. We want to see greatness. And the only way to be great or to have greatness within a fight is to fight another great fighter, in my opinion. It's very hard to fight a guy that is lesser than you and to create something great. And it's unfortunate because, like you said, this could be a coming out party, but I don't know if this is the fight or the dance partner to really be a coming out party.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, we got to remember that Anderson Silva wasn't beloved the way he is now, several years into his title reign. It took him to have Chael Sonnen antagonize him into people really caring. And then it took for him to front kick Vitor Belfort into oblivion. And that was what was necessary in order to get a lot of people on board and realize how great what we were watching was, because previous to that, he was beating Talis Latis. He's Patrick Cote's knee blows out on him in the in this beginning of the third round or whatever, and we just took for granted how great of a mixed martial artist Anderson Silva was. And DJ has kind of fallen into that same trap. And that's no disrespect to any of their previous opponents between DJ and Anderson Silva. These are all guys who are legitimate fighters and guys who, in one way or another, earned their title shots. That moment wasn't created. And that's what DJ needs, is just that little sliver of time that we can point to and say that that's the day that happened.
Yeah, and I think that because of the nature of the 125-pound division in the UFC and just MMA in general, it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to create a Chael Sonnen. Because I don't think anyone really wants to be a Chael Sonnen right now. Like, that's a hard thing to do, is be a Chael Sonnen. That takes a lot of effort. But Anderson Silva is always the best example for Demetrius Johnson. The fact that, yes, he hasn't become a star yet. That doesn't mean he can't be one. Stars can be born late. That happens quite often. I think Roy Jones Jr. became a star really after the heavyweight division win. Like, that's the heavyweight title. When Roy Jones won that heavyweight title, more casuals knew about him than his prime at middleweight. So I think that we're going to get that situation where Demetrius Johnson is going to move up, fight probably 3 or 4 or 5 times in the 135-pound division, maybe lose 1 or 2, and a lot of the casual fans are going to miss that prime, that run of the Benavidez's, of the Moragas, of those fights, because those were spectacular MMA fights to watch in a way of learning the sport. Like, if you want to watch a fight and learn something, you watch a Demetrius Johnson fight. You want to learn about the sport of boxing, you put in Floyd Mayweather if you want to learn. But any final thoughts on UFC 215? It's been a long podcast. I think we're going to wrap it up here. Santiago, I know you haven't really talked that much, but we had a special guest. I know you're okay with it. So any final thoughts on UFC 215, on Jon Jones PED scandal, the UFC and how they promote fighters, Mayweather McGregor? Santiago first.
Well, I mean, obviously, the saga continues for Mayweather and McGregor for however long the talk persists. There's not much to say. Obviously, all three of us are in agreement that, we're done with this at this point. We're moving on to the next topics, UFC 215 for you guys, the Superfly event for myself, and, there's not much else to say, regarding the Jon Jones scandal or, what Demetrius Johnson's place is in the history books, because I feel that he is one of the best fighters out there right now for in his division, and if he moves up, we'll see. You know, will he be mortal? Will he continue his run?
Anthony, any final thoughts?
My final thoughts. I'm gonna employ. I'm gonna screw up the word. I'm just gonna encourage everybody. yes, that's the word. That's the word. I'm gonna encourage everybody listening to tune in to UFC 215. We are potentially watching history. You know,
and
DJ is gonna.
Most people aren't gonna pay those pay-per-view bucks for it. And you know what? Look, we don't endorse piracy here. And I understand that, but I do understand that we had Mayweather McGregor, and a lot of people paid for that, which was $100. We have Triple G Canelo literally in 2 weeks. That's another $70 out of your pocket, and everyone needs to go pay for that fight as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you stream this one, I'm not upset, but you should go and support. You should pay your dollars to support Demetrius Johnson. He is getting pay-per-view points for the first time in his career, and he has been a fighter that has supported other fighters, has supported the sport as a whole. Has been gracious to the fans in so many ways. I think the fans and the consumers should go out and help Demetrius Johnson, even though I know we're back-to-back weeks of a lot of pay-per-views, a lot of money being spent on the sport. But this is one, though.
And a lot of good fights, too.
A lot of good fights. This is one, though, that you need to pay attention to because, like Anthony said, it is historic in a lot of ways. Anthony, you want to finish up, though?
Oh yeah. Just watch it. Like, you know, I'm definitely with you on that. Don't pirate this one. Make a party out of it. Go to a bar. Watch it legally. Support fighters like Demetrius Johnson, please.
Yes, I agree. Anthony, where can they find you? Where can the people find you at?
You can find me on Twitter at AntWalkerMMA. You can also catch me on the Sherdog Radio Network. I'm the co-host for the Jordan Breen Show, which is airs Wednesday mornings. You can catch anything else I do for Sherdog Radio on podcast format through iTunes, SoundCloud, or Google Play. Just look for the Sherdog Radio Network. Also, I've got a podcast out with Murph Baldwin of Rivals.com called Calculus of Combat. So check for that as well. I'll be on the UFC 215 beatdown after the bell as well. So call in. We'll talk fights.
Yes, go support Anthony Walker, one of the good guys in the MMA media world. One of the newer faces within the MMA media world, and one of my favorite listens. I'll be honest, the Jordan Breen Show on the Sherdog Radio Network. If you don't listen to that podcast, you should. Whether they're talking about hip hop, fucking O.J. Simpson killing people, MMA, or anything else, it is a great listen to. So please go listen to that and go support some awesome guys in the media industry. Man, we're out of here. It's been a long one. It's hot, man. My AC is turned off, man. It's like 85 degrees in here, man. It's too much. So we're out of here. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and we'll be back soon. Peace.